I'm Rick Dadarian, and this is Realms of Memory. If memory often functions in terms of counting the fallen, counting the survivors, counting the cost, how do we remember the homeless? We have no real accurate number for the homeless, except for official snapshots in time, momentary counts of the unhoused in shelters, transitional housing, and public spaces. We have no idea how many people are living in cars, sleeping on couches, or relying on low-cost motels, except that number is many times greater than the official count. How do we remember a population that includes so many different kinds of people? Single men, families, veterans, the disabled, young and old. Writer Alison Owings tried to remember the homeless by telling the story of one man, Del Seymour. This, in many respects, is a story of triumph and redemption. Del went from living on the streets of San Francisco to becoming known as Mayor of the Tenderloin, the city's neighborhood with the largest homeless population. He earned this title not just through his Tenderloin Walking Tours, drawing attention to the plight of the homeless, but through the creation of Code Tenderloin, a program that has helped thousands of members of the community find jobs and a new life. A conversation with Alison Owings about her book, Mayor of the Tenderloin, Del Seymour's journey from living on the streets to fighting homelessness in San Francisco, in this episode of Realms of Memory. Alison Owings knew from the age of 10 that she wanted to be a writer. She majored in journalism and ended up at CBS in New York working as a writer for the men who were known as the big boys, Dan Rather, Walter Cronkite, and Charles Kuralt.
I loved writing for CBS News, but it was frantic. I mean, you maybe had a breaking news story and you're already on the air, and Cronkite has 20 million viewers, and you're told, don't worry, we've got a commercial coming up. You'll have at least 4 minutes to reach this police captain and find the answer and type it up and get it to Walter. Don't worry about it. And I mean, it was nerve-wracking. It was thrilling, but nerve-wracking.
Alison left her job at CBS because she wanted to write books that would give her more time to reflect and refine her writing about subjects that no one else would write about. She moved to Spain to write a novel, but instead set herself on a course of oral history books inspired by encounters with stereotyped and misunderstood people.
I began working on a novel, still unpublished, and ended up living in southern Spain because it was a cheap place to live to write my novel. And I turned out to be in a community of expatriate German women who had been through the Third Reich. And I happened to speak German because I had studied it in high school. In fact, spent a year in Germany studying. So I was living in southern Spain speaking German. And when I returned to the United States, I realized, oh, these friendly neighbors were witnesses to the Third Reich. Has anyone ever interviewed them before? And the answer was basically no. So that began a long quest of interviewing these women. And I learned very early on that my assumption that German women, so-called, were better than German men was completely off, because the very first woman I interviewed started talking about the idealism of National Socialism. So it became a book to examine the stereotypes about German women in the Third Reich. So I interviewed Nazis, I interviewed a guard, I interviewed resistance heroines, I interviewed farm women, I interviewed a countess, I interviewed all kinds of women. So I was trying to de-stereotype what maybe Americans thought of as the German women in the Third Reich, if they thought about them at all. And I next decided to write a book about American waitresses because I got so many speaking invitations for my book. It was called Frauen, German Women Recall the Third Reich. I still have trouble with the German word, but Frauen. And I was on my own a lot and touring the country speaking about the book, and I was just paying more and more attention to waitresses because I would often eat by myself in a place where a woman would feel comfortable. And there were waitresses, and I thought, oh, what's really going on with them? And I didn't know much. I'd been a lousy waitress for 2 weeks myself, but that was it. And big leap forward, a few years forward, then I published Hey Waitress, the USA from the Other Side of the Tray. And again, it was looking at the stereotype of women as waitresses. And I was trying to undo that stereotype and find out what the women thought about what they did and about their work and about their coworkers and about the aspects of tipping, for instance. And one of the waitresses I interviewed was on a Indian reservation in Arizona, the Tohono O'odham Reservation. And she was telling me about her life as a waitress. And apparently the tribal chairman did not tip well. And I thought, oh, Native Americans, another stereotype. People just think of Indians as Indians and that they don't exist anymore. And so I spent another 5 to 7 years interviewing Native people all over the country because nobody else had done it this way, to find out what Native people have in common, what they don't have in common. And so I interviewed people from the Passamaquoddies in Maine to the last chapter is actually a Hawaiian chanter, a Native person, but Hawaiian. And along the way, asked them about their lives and their lives in a country that in effect has taken their country away from them. So I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I live in the Bay Area, and I saw homelessness all around me. I mean, I'd see tarps and tents, and you can't avoid it unless you live in maybe in some enclave and you never go outside. So I thought about interviewing homeless people all over the country to examine that stereotype. And I was just exhausted at the very idea, because I thought, this is going to be hard. Not to mention it's going to be difficult with follow-up questions, not to mention it'll be difficult if people are currently homeless and are maybe addicted or who knows what. People are not in great situations when they're homeless. And I more or less abandoned the idea. I also thought, although I'm not good at marketing, I thought, who would want to read a book that has nothing but unhappy endings? And moreover, who would want to publish a book that has nothing but unhappy endings? So I was mulling what to do when I met Del Seymour. And I met him in San Francisco. Here's a picture of Del Seymour. And every writer has a reader's copy that's bookmarked with all kinds of passages they read from. And he was leading a walking tour of the Tenderloin in San Francisco. I had no idea he had been homeless. I knew he'd been addicted. He'd been addicted to crack cocaine. I knew some unsavory parts about him because he was open in telling the story. And then we got to an intersection. I write about this in the preface, actually. We get to an intersection in San Francisco. And he said, see that block over there? He said, I could have gotten a PhD in sidewalks. And that expression told me three things. It told me he'd been homeless. And it told me he had a sense of humor. And it told me he had a certain way of telling a story. And I've interviewed a lot of people who are not in my books because they just simply could not tell a story. I would ask somebody, what happened on your reservation? That was quite an upheaval, right? And this very nice Navajo guy said, yeah, that was interesting. And I said, interesting how? Oh, I don't know. It was just interesting. And I thought, this is not going to work. But Del talking about a PhD in sidewalks, I immediately knew, this is catnip to an oral historian, I immediately knew he'd be a great interviewee. So I contacted him and I said I was writing a book about homelessness, and I thought perhaps I could just focus on one person rather than go all over the country. And he said, okay. And I ended up spending close to a decade working on this book. And I interviewed about, I should count them really, but there are about 15 other people in the book. Most, but not all, connected to Del. I interviewed 2 of his adult daughters. He's now 78. I interviewed his former crack dealer. I interviewed the Tenderloin police captain who knew him. I interviewed his sister-in-law. I interviewed a man he calls his sobriety buddy, and a lot of people around him whom Del introduced me to. And then I broadened the field a little bit and interviewed a psychiatrist who helps marginalized people and a few other people in that field. But essentially, it's Del's story. And I never meant for it to be, this is a typical homeless person. I just meant it to be, this is one man's story, and he can tell a heck of a story. And this is what we can learn, perhaps, from him.
So you're writing about this area of San Francisco. And if you're like me and you've taken a couple trips in the past to San Francisco and you've done the typical tourist thing, you've probably never been to the Tenderloin. You've gone to the Fisherman's Wharf. You've had an Irish coffee, Girardelli's. You've seen the sourdough bread, but you haven't been to the Fisherman's. You haven't been to the Tenderloin. So, can you explain what is this particular? What's the significance of this particular neighborhood?
It's downtown San Francisco, and it's, in a word, it's beleaguered. It's also hopeful in many, many ways. And the housing stock there is full of what's called SROs, which means single room occupancy. And they're shabby hotels, mostly all shabby, not all. And with one room and then a toilet at the end of the hallway. And they had been meant for more transitory populations. I picture, for instance, merchant marines who might be in town for a little while between ships and needed a place to stay. And a lot are in really bad shape. And Del, the man I wrote about, Del Seymour, thinks they should all be torn down and replaced with glass and metal, he said, because they're so shoddy, and people live in them and do not live well in them. He said the toilet could be broken on the 5th floor, so you have to use the one on the 3rd floor, and that's pretty disgusting. So it's a housing area that is right near a very posh area. It's between the financial district and the Union Square area, which are both kind of tourist magnets on their own. And the reason it's unusual is that it is in the middle of the city. Unlike in other cities like New York City, I understand that homeless populations are at the end of a subway line. So people don't necessarily know anything about them unless they live there themselves. So the Tenderloin also used to be a theater district. There are some theaters there still now. And it's also become a drug capital in ways of the city. There are many efforts to clean it up. There are also people who just go there to sell or buy drugs. It's also a place, I believe, with more children per capita than any other part of San Francisco, because there's so many immigrant families there. A lot of people from Yemen, for instance, from South America. And it's, to some people, it's very scary. I'd say, to me, it's daunting at night. There have been nightclubs there. I mean, some people are afraid to go out of their apartments at night. There are also many organizations that try to help there. Glide Church, for instance, is famous church, and it supplies all kinds of food. And as is St. Anthony's, there are lots of charities in San Francisco. There's a wonderful place called the Healing Well where people can go and get foot massages or massages and just chill out for a while. And yet there are also people lying on the street, and you don't know if they're alive or dead. So there are people who clearly are affected by drugs who are stumbling along, bent over, whether it's fentanyl or meth. I can't always tell. A lot of people know this a lot better than I do. But it's a beleaguered part of the city, which is also fascinating in many ways because so many people are trying to help who are there. And sometimes it's the only part of the city where someone can afford to live because of these lousy SROs. So in a way, it's a contradiction in terms. It's fascinating. It's got a rich history. It's been very accepting of gay people. It's also a place of sort of vice and then clean up vice and then anti-vice and pro-vice. It's very lively. There are outdoor events of all kinds. I mean, people climbing buildings at night with spotlights on them as a performance group. It's really interesting, but it's they could use a lot more help, and a lot of the places are in really terrible condition. Dell himself says if you want to help in the Tenderloin, don't bring food because there's plenty of food. A lot of organizations are well established and very generous. But people need other things besides food.
Okay. So you've got this visible population in the center of the city, which makes the Tenderloin unusual compared to other cities. But at the same time, this book is part of a series of books that you've written in the past, looking at these populations that are stereotyped, overlooked. So I don't know whether going into this project, you had your own stereotypes. How much of this was a process of discovery for you? What were the stereotypes? In what ways were people overlooked?
I think my stereotype wasn't quite as fixed as perhaps other people's stereotypes are. I'm so used to distrusting stereotypes that I don't necessarily see groups of people in the same way that other people might. But there were a lot of things I didn't know. For instance, I didn't know that some people who are homeless are drug-free, alcohol-free. They're just homeless because they can't afford a place to live. I didn't know until I met Dell that some homeless people have full-time jobs and just sleep where they can. And there is now a distinction between what's called sheltered homeless and unsheltered homeless. And sheltered homeless might mean that someone's camping in a car or on someone's couch or in an abandoned building. That would be a sheltered homeless person. And that person might have a full-time job. I didn't realize, I guess my stereotype was, I don't know if I was so curious. I don't know if I had pre-existing stereotypes. I guess I would have thought most were men, and I think most are men. The ages vary enormously, and I guess I didn't know that. Dell himself became homeless because of taking one hit of crack cocaine, as he famously says to people in talks, and we mostly give talks together, that he drove into San Francisco. This is from Oakland in the East Bay. He drove into San Francisco one day, and 28 days later, he was living under the freeway. The same freeway he drove in on, he was living under. So crack cocaine did that to him with one hit. And he was 40 years old at the time, and he'd had an impressive career before that. I think his curiosity all but killed him, really. And I didn't realize there were so many variations in age. And I didn't realize also until I talked to a formerly homeless woman in the book how very, very dangerous it is for women, basically trading sex for a safe place to sleep. And I didn't realize until recently, and this is somewhat new, how many children are homeless. And I also didn't realize how many attempts it can take if you are addicted while homeless to get out of it. And when Del and I spoke recently at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, he basically summarized what it can be to be homeless and be addicted. When you're homeless, you have innumerable problems. I mean, finding a safe place to sleep, finding a bathroom, finding something you can use as a bathroom, finding a clean pair of socks. All things can be daunting. And he said, then you take one hit of crack and he said, problem solved. You don't care anymore. Until, of course, that wears off and then you have to hustle and figure out where to get your next hit. So to answer your question, I'm not sure what my stereotypes were. But I didn't perhaps appreciate just how difficult on so many levels it is to get out of homelessness. Trying to get sober, trying to clean up, trying to get a job if you don't have a job. And then there's the whole question of self-esteem. And one of the things I learned from Del is that, well, here's maybe a stereotype that other people have. You're walking down the street and there are people on the sidewalk, let's say sitting, alive, alert. And I would tend to look away thinking I want to give them privacy. It's none of my business. But I think in general, not in all cases, but in general, that's wrong. A lot of people feel so abandoned and so alone, so discarded, that they welcome someone just to give eye contact and a smile, not to mention to say hello, good morning. He said, don't always say, how are you? Because the answer is pretty obvious, but just acknowledge that this is a human being. That can help someone get out of a certain cycle of feeling that they'll never leave homelessness. So acknowledging someone as a human being has a lot more import than I realized.
So you've got this.
It's not intrusive.
But one thing I thought was interesting is that Del does not start directly into Code Tenderloin. You discover him through his tour of the neighborhood, and the first thing he does is get these tours going. And if you talk about trying to shatter the invisibility of a population, trying to create awareness, he's giving this tour of the Tenderloin, and he does that for years before he starts the other project. And I think you're kind of doing the same thing in your book, as you're unpacking Del's memories to try to get at the complexity of this story of a population where we often don't consider the humanity of the homeless. And you're showing that this person has an incredibly diverse life. I mean, I read this book and it was almost like a Forrest Gump story, that he was everywhere, doing everything. I mean, he was breaking barriers as a black firefighter after he got out of the Vietnam War. He's running a successful construction company. He just has multiple life stories. So I don't know whether the intention was your intention of telling these stories just what unfolded in the course of your interviews, or was that part of the thinking that if we're going to challenge simplistic ways of thinking about the homeless or ignoring them, what better way to do it than to just unpack this rich life of episodes.
Well, Rick, I didn't know what I was unpacking. I My initial impetus, as I said, was to examine the life of one person who had been homeless, and to do it in a way that I hoped would encourage housed people, people I knew, to help somehow. And whether it was to say hello to a homeless person or to vote for a homeless shelter in their community or whatever, my motive, which was not Dell's motive, my motive was to explore the stereotype and to make people a little more empathetic toward people who are homeless and to understand a little more about them. Not that everyone who is homeless is a wonderful person necessarily, but at least to give a face to one person, because a lot of, let's say, suburbanites don't necessarily see a single homeless person necessarily, and certainly haven't met any. So I was kind of, and I've done this in the other books too. I'm sort of a introducer, a middle person. But I didn't know much about Dell when we first met. I I knew he'd been homeless, and I knew he'd been a crack addict, and I knew he was from Chicago. Um, and he had just started this Code Tenderloin program, and I thought, oh, that's nice. I mean, he had just started a few months ago, so that could have just disappeared and been nothing, and instead of a major part of the story. I I did not know until I'd interviewed him for the first few months, and I think I ended up interviewing him for about 7 years. I did not know he'd been a pimp, and I have such a visceral reaction toward pimping and prostitution and what it does to women that, in retrospect, and I believe I allude to this in the book, I might not have interviewed him in the first place had I known that, because it's just not a sympathetic trait to me at all. And yet, by the time I found out, I was learning more and more about him, and I thought, well, this is part of who he is. And he was very reluctant to talk about it. That was something else. It was very difficult to get him to talk about it. He said, where's the salvation part of this? Why are you asking me about this? And my honest answer was, it's part of who he is and part of who he was. So we went forward somewhat gingerly, but we went forward with that. But there was a lot of stuff about him I had no idea. I mean, I could tell he was a smart guy. I could tell he was really inventive and funny and engaging, which is what you need as an oral historian, someone who can tell a good story. But there was substance to the stories. It wasn't just a plain old story. I mean, there was great drama in it, including about getting sober and then what threw him backwards again. So I did not know, to answer your basic question, I did not know what would be unfolding as he talked to me.
And he has an amazingly rich life story. And the way you wrote this, which it sounds like was not the original way you organized your book, it goes back and forth between the past and the present. So you get to introduce Dell, what's happening in the current, well, at least at the time, before you published the recent past, and then you go back in time and talk about an earlier point in his life, which I think keeps the reader engaged in this back and forth. But that's a strategic choice as well, right? And how you address this kind of topic, right?
Well, I'm glad you put it in a positive way. I mean, I think it works, but it's not really my decision. I initially wrote, this is maybe more candid than a writer should be, but I initially wrote the book more or less chronologically. And because there was so much to it, I just didn't know how to organize it. So it was chronological. He was born in Chicago, And my agent, Rayco Davis, said, You know, you're asking a lot of a reader to read 200 pages before this guy's life takes off in a positive way. And I don't think that's going to work because people haven't heard of him. I mean, he's pretty well known in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, but he's not a national figure. So how about if I reorganize it? And I said, okay. At some point, this is typical of writers. At some point, you fight and fight and fight, and then you say, okay, all right, do what you want. So she rearranged it to start off with a very upbeat chapter of the first graduation of his Code Tenderloin class. And everyone is happy and excited and high-fiving, and it's really a joyful moment in his life and in the book. So then she sells the book to Beacon Press. And the editor at Beacon Press said, "Oh, we really love this book." But the organization really doesn't work because it starts with this very joyful chapter, and yet the reader doesn't know what it came from. The reader has no idea that what Dell has been through, and it's almost like you're getting high too fast. So Joanna Green, the editor at Beacon, said, "I think you should start with him low." So we started with his fall into addiction, and then she paced it basically back and forth, up and down, and virtually all readers think it's really interesting because it's episodic, but you don't quite know what's coming next. And but that's how it evolved. It was not my brilliance at all. I wrote the chapters. The words are all mine, but the order of the words is not all mine.
Okay, but so you mentioned you yourself are uncomfortable about certain aspects of his past, but you're making decisions about what memories to try to unpack and which ones to leave alone. And you decide that the story of his past as a pimp, you can't understand him without that. Why is it so important to tell that story? How is that central to everything else that unfolds afterwards?
Well, partly because the women he pimped were African American women. And virtually all, from what I understand from him, were addicts as well, at least crack addicts as well. And it's a painful part of his past. So part of the story, his overall story, is triumphing over his past. And I think that is the most painful part, as far as I know, of his past. And also, Code Tenderloin, the free jobs training program, has helped lots and lots and lots of young African American women, in my opinion, the daughters of the women he pimped. Not necessarily the real daughters of the women he pimped, but their successors, who could have, without opportunities, have gone the way their mothers went, maybe. And I think it's a form of his salvation to help these young women, a form of atonement maybe for what he did to their mothers. I could be wrong. I think if I said this to him, he'd make a joke and shrug it off. Maybe, I don't know, or he might agree. I don't know, but I think that was his motive to make up for past sins.
So if the story is one of personal redemption, it's the desire for redemption, for atonement, that really drives a lot of his work, that he feels like he's wronged a lot of people, wronged his own community, and he needs to make amends for it.
I think that's a good part of it. I also think that he's a compassionate person, and he sees the suffering in his community, and he wants to do better. And he also, at one point, he said, it's a little bit like addiction, the successes that he's had with Code Tenderloin. I think he mentions this phrase in the book, that that the ball is going in the hoop more and more now, and you kind of get off on this success rate. And he's certainly been acknowledged for what he's done. I mean, he's the mayor of the Tenderloin, so he realizes that, and he likes the acknowledgement. I mean, in a way, it maybe keeps him clean. He could be exhausted, but he likes being a force. He likes having status of someone who can also make decisions that help people. And he's co-chair of the homelessness coordinating board, I think it is, at City Hall. They don't exactly have power, but they have power of suggestions, and it's a prestigious organization, small but prestigious, and he has a voice, and mayors listen to him now, and I mean, he enjoys having that influence. It comes with a lot of difficulty. I mean, people are leaning on him all the time and want his help more than maybe what he can give. But he's also a very generous person, so he tries to help how he can. But I think he kind of gets off on being able to. It's a triumph over who he was.
And I know in the presentations I've seen you give with him, that's also part of why he agreed to do these interviews and be a part of the book, that it wasn't that he was naturally inclined to tell his story. And he said many times he comes from a community where you don't air your dirty laundry in public. But he felt like there was a need to do it. So again, there's an interesting kind of memory connection there, that the memories he's relating are not necessarily for himself. And there are a lot of things, a lot of places, like you said, you don't really probe too much into the memories of addiction or, what drew you into this world, because those are dangerous memories, and it's still too volatile, and he's still a recovering addict, and maybe he'll always be. So you have to leave those alone. And a lot of the things he's recounting are shameful and for himself, the ways he harmed the community, but there's a larger good that drives his need to remember.
Mm-hmm. Right. And his motive, he has said recently, in talking to me in these memories that he didn't necessarily want to explore, was to help other people like him who'd been down and out, who thought, I'll never get out of here. I've ruined my life. I've ruined my kid's life. I've ruined my wife's life. I'm just a failure. I'm horrible. But look at this, Del Seymour. He was the same way, and he got out of it. So maybe I have hope too. So he's been saying lately, that was his motive to talk to me, whereas my motive was to help people who didn't need that kind of help, but who could help maybe.
It's interesting, because I just finished doing an interview with a professor who writes about new types of memorial museums, and they're museums that deal with injustices, often in the not too distant past. So it could be something like the massacres that happened in Tulsa in the early 1920s, and they're all based on the notion of redemption, that we need to confront past wrongs for the purpose of these things not happening again. And we need to reach out, educate people. And I mean, I see a lot of what you're doing and a lot of what Del's doing is really keeping it in line with the current uses of memory. So how do you affect people emotionally? You tell these stories. And people argue it all goes back to Holocaust testimonials, Holocaust memory, and so much of the work now, whether you're trying to sensitize people to gun violence or racism, you use testimonial memory to make it personal, to draw people in. Very much what you're doing in your book, what Del's doing in his own story, and what Del was doing in his tours, I think probably of the Tenderloin.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's true. And the tours in the Tenderloin, that was partly also to engage the local tech community, because tech is very much on the fringes and within the Tenderloin, but also on the fringes. I mean, the big boys of tech too. And so he got introduction somehow to people there, and gave tours to those people. So that formed a great alliance, and then they later would help fund Code Tenderloin.
And if there's one, I mean, his strength, because I had a question about, how does somebody with so many resources become so resourceless? He's done so many different things in his life, and he ends up homeless. But really, that past life of all the things he did, he is a networker. He is good at connecting people. So that life very much, I think, is a part of his success in getting Code Tenderloin off the ground. I mean, he's really connecting with the movers and shakers in the political community and the business community to get a job training program off the ground. And then it goes far beyond that.
Yes. It's not only job training, but they have outreach at night. I think two organizations have donated vans, and they go out at night and see people in distress until 3 a.m. and connect them to a doctor who can prescribe Narcan and help them. I mean, it's beyond getting people ready to do a nice interview with a prospective boss. It's really remarkable.
My sense, especially with the interviews I've heard you do with Del, is that there are a lot of resources that are being thrown at this, but they aren't aligned very well. And I know Del has said himself that a lot of it is just a numbers game. It's just, you're just targeting as many people as you can, but you're not necessarily being that thorough as far as the help people are really getting. So I don't know whether this was part of your, not just learning about the plight of the homeless and all the different people that are part of that population, but all the ways in which the issue is managed or mismanaged. And you mentioned earlier that the Trump administration just recently announced, just on Thursday, a major policy shift in how funding is going to work. We're moving away from long-term housing towards more short-term treatment and housing, and how that's going to affect an already unprecedentedly large population. I don't know, what are your thoughts on, what did you take away from how this is being managed or mismanaged?
You mean nationally?
Or you're just looking at San Francisco? And I've heard Del say that he goes around the country and he often finds that other cities do it better than San Francisco.
Well, it's a complex answer, and I'm not even sure I have it correctly, but in his opinion, there's no bureaucracy like San Francisco's, and apparently Mayor Lurie is trying to make it a little more efficient. But in Del's opinion, a bureaucrat will say, I met with 300 homeless people today, and in Del's opinion, he got them from A to B. And he'll say, that doesn't do anything. Don't go to a few hundred, go to 5 and get them from A to Z, and find out what their names are. I mean, he sometimes asks people, okay, so you met with this person. Do they have children? What did they used to do in life? What did you find out about them? And sometimes the answer is they found out nothing about them, depending on the person, on the caseworker, and so forth. I think personally that, and I think Del would agree, a lot of people are exhausted not only being homeless, but exhausted with the so-called problem of homelessness that's not being solved. And people think they're being taxed more, maybe. They have what's called empathy fatigue. They don't know what to do next, and the problem doesn't seem to be getting any better. And Del is of the opinion you'll never solve homelessness. You get everyone you get everyone in San Francisco in a safe shelter with food and services today. And he said a bus will come in from Reno tomorrow with 300 more people who want some help. Even though, as he's pointed out, in general, most people who are homeless in their home cities. It's not like people are traveling all over the country to be homeless in another city. It's pretty much a local phenomenon. Uh, I think that speaking as someone who's not homeless, I think people would like to see a little more success rate, and I think the empathy factor is certainly valid. I'm afraid that the current administration seems a little low on empathy anyway, especially for people who seem down and out and literally are down and out. And as if you can pull yourself up with your own bootstraps if you don't have any boots. So I don't know that approach is going to be helpful at all to anybody. And there's certainly lots of debates among people who try to care for homeless people about what's the best approach. And Dell and others have said it varies. These are individual human beings. They have different needs. Sometimes someone, all he or she needs is a little extra money for a rent subsidy, and things will be fine. But being priced out of your apartment and becoming homeless means then pretty soon you might lose your job. And some people are just, Dell said he doesn't like to use the word, he uses the word crazy, and some people call him on it, but he says some people are crazy and you can't help them. I mean, they're going to need support services all their lives. And I think that has to be acknowledged. So in summary, I'd say that it's an extremely complex problem, but at the heart of it is, from what I know, at the heart of it is the loss of affordable housing. And when people are down and out, they self-medicate, and they self-medicate sometimes with drugs they don't even know they're necessarily taking. You know, fentanyl is now being put into heroin. And and I know personally from this book of two instances where people were trying to get high and died. So people don't necessarily even know what they're taking. I'd say it's very complex. It's a very complex problem, but the best solution would probably be to help people not be homeless in the first place.
And I know Dell makes the point that you have to first have a realization that you want to be helped, and that there could be a gap in time between when you realize you want to be helped to when you're actually ready to be helped. And you have some chapters in your book where he has these amazing opportunities that he has people who set him up with great jobs, a community that takes him in, makes him their own, and he's not ready, and he squanders those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have another episode where everything turns around unexpectedly and suddenly for him. So I don't know whether, is that a case that he wasn't ready earlier? What were those opportunities that he just wasn't able to build on? And why was it different at a later point in time? And can we draw any larger conclusions from his own life story?
I would think that the the lure of crack cocaine was so strong that he was fine when he was away from it. Fine in a way. But in one story I think you're talking about, he thought he'd kicked it, and then he met this dope prostitute, as he calls her, and she offered him some drugs, and he took it, and he was back, and he said that's the problem was it's in human nature. He said you want to reward yourself with exactly what did you in, like a fat person losing a lot of weight wants to celebrate by having ice cream. It's human nature to do that. And I think, though, that later when it took, I think he was just weary. And he was, I guess, in his 60s then. And so older, he was always wise, but he promised God that God wasn't going to see him with a crack pipe in his mouth anymore. So he managed to put everything together, sort of out of stubbornness too, to convince himself that this time he wasn't going to fall back, and he hasn't. And yet he did not want me to ask him too much, as you mentioned, Rick. When I was trying to ask about the lure of crack, how does it make you feel? He didn't want to talk about that because he didn't want to remember how it made him feel, because it made him feel ecstatic. And he said you don't want to. He has several expressions for it, but you don't want to wake up the snake.
Do you get a sense, especially being in California, that the left and right are just converging on homelessness? That it's just there have been recent Supreme Court rulings that now make it a lot easier to clear out encampments. And I know Gavin Newsom has been pretty aggressive on this. Trump has been pretty aggressive on this. It seems to be a convergence on the left and right that you really need to aggressively remove populations. And I know that one of the Dell's points is that you need to take people into consideration. You need to give people choices. One of the problems with the approach to the homeless is that you don't treat them like people who are adults. They're often put into shelters with rigid rules and regulations, and people are deprived of their humanity in that respect. And now we have a kind of even more aggressive policing approach to the homeless.
And getting rid of all their stuff, too. I mean, I'm someone who has stuff, books and all kinds of things. And I sometimes think, what is it like just suddenly to have everything you own just taken away from you because you missed the moment of the sweep, but also losing your identity cards and losing your medication and losing the picture of your dog or losing your pet. I mean, what is it like not to have anything tangible at all in your life anymore? That must be very. I would think that would be a big load for me if I were homeless. Suddenly have nothing at all. I mean, maybe some people would find it freeing and liberating, but I wouldn't. And as he says, if you're going to move from one place to another and you're housed, you have a few choices. You decide where to go. But when you're just put into one shelter, let's say a shelter where you were attacked earlier, you don't want to go there, but you don't have any say about it. And sometimes people who are doing the sweeps, they're not necessarily trained in what they need to be trained for. I mean, they could be really great sanitation workers, but they're not trained to be counselors, and maybe counseling is what's needed at that point. So, and then people get, like mayors and governors get frustrated at the lack of progress. So there's a sweep, and then people end up essentially 2 blocks away. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be working at all.
Because I thought one of his big points is it's getting to know the population that you're dealing with. It's building relationships. It's building trust, that people have been policed and moved around and not given many choices, and that you really need to understand the population you're up against, or working, trying to work with, not against. And maybe that's one of the ways that it's done wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I also think that there's a factor of also people not thinking they're useful. And Del and I didn't really talk about that a lot, but I think the programs that work the best from my perspective are ones where everyone is encouraged to help out somehow. And not necessarily be a mentor, but just help somehow, and feel that you have some worth, whether it's sweeping the street in front of your area, or whether it's monitoring something, whether it's serving juice, whether it's whatever it is, just so that you don't feel that you're only receiving, but that you can give something back, and makes you feel a little better about yourself.
Alison, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me on your Saturday morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick. You had terrific questions. I really appreciate them.
I've been talking with Alison Owings about her book, Mayor of the Tenderloin, Del Seymour's journey from living on the streets to fighting homelessness in San Francisco. If you've enjoyed this or other episodes of Realms of Memory, tell a friend or family member, subscribe on our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast app, and review us wherever you can. I'm Rick Dadarian. See you soon.